A very warm welcome to another gripping session in the ICF India Conclave. On the second day of this conclave, we had a fantastic and fabulous first day. So many events, and we had some superb feedback as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being kind to us. So, wishing you good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Is Krishnan along with Vasudev Nagaraj and Priyanka, who will be your hosts and supports today. Today, in this session, we have a panel discussion on integrating coaching into educational curriculum. When we look at a country's progress, the mining and mineral resources are the past of a nation, which is actually benefiting in the present. The finances and money that we make are the present in present, and education is the future in present. And that's an investment that every nation makes in its future. And that's been reimagined in multiple ways, especially in the current digital age. We may have heard of sessions under the tree in the good old days, to physical classrooms, and to the current digital age, where the learning content, delivery, pedagogy, and technology have dramatically changed the way we perceive the role of education. How does coaching and coaching mindset fit into this new future? Should coaching be part of our education curriculum? Should we look at students emerging as coaches, students emerge, or students being coached? All this is a fantastic dream that we have. But to discuss this, we have here some fantastic speakers who have their real life insights. And let me introduce the distinguished panel of experts right now. Let me start with Mr. R. Ramanan. Mr. Ramanan was the first mission director of Atal Innovation Mission, initiative of Government of India. As additional secretary at Niti Aayog, he was instrumental in launching several programs, including 10,000 plus Atal labs in schools, 100 plus Atal incubators and community innovation centers, fostering 2,200 plus startups, of which 675 were women-led. An alumnus of IIT Mumbai and Harvard Business School, Mr. Ramanan was previously MD and CEO of CMC Limited. He has received numerous global awards for corporate and societal leadership. Warm welcome, Mr. Ramanan. Second speaker for today is Mr. Anurag Behr, the CEO of Asim Premji Foundation. Anurag aims to create sustainable society, and is instrumental in deploying programs to improve public education. Anurag contributed to the draft education policy 2020, which was widely acclaimed. A vocal advocate of the importance of public system, he writes regularly in newspapers and serves in key policy-making bodies like Ministry of Education's AQIP, National Mission on Teachers and Education, Center for Biological Sciences, and CII's Climate Change Council. Warm welcome, Anurag.
Thank you.
When we have people of this eminence, the moderator also has to be of that caliber, and that's where we have our own Raj Dharmaraj, who would be moderating this session. Raj heads the people transitions for Cognizant in APAC and India, and has 3 decades of IT industry experience, spanning roles in business technology consulting, account management, and HR globally. He has an MBA from XLRI. He's a Fulbright Fellow from Carnegie Mellon University, and is an ICF PCC credential coach. He's actively involved in Cognizant's Leadership Gym program. He's co-founder of Chennai Mentors, a volunteer-based network supporting school children from underprivileged backgrounds. So here we have 3 different people who are eminent in their own landscapes relating to education, and it's going to be a fantastic session ahead. A warm welcome to all of you, and I now hand over to Raj to carry on the proceedings.
Thank you, Krishnan. And Anurag and Ramanan, extending my warm welcome to you. It's really a privilege to have you here. Really excited to hear your perspectives on what I think is, crucial to the essence of coaching. There's a direct connect in my mind to education, and your experiences are so common yet diverse in terms of your corporate careers, your stellar corporate careers, moving into education in different ways, and policy making as well as imparting education, and then the close links back to societal development. So It's really a privilege to have you both here, and we're really looking forward to your insights. So, if I may, to set the ball rolling, to go back to the overall question about education and integrating education into the coaching, coaching into the educational landscape. Could you share a few insights, and maybe Anurag, I will ask you to go. What's your perspective on current situation and priorities in education, and what should be some of the challenges and priorities we should be focusing on?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Raj. It's a pleasure to be here with you. That is such a complex question. We can just go on for 100 days on that particular question, right? So let me just say it briefly. One is, what are the underlying fundamental challenges that the education system is facing, and that's the reality of our education system. And two, what's the immediate crisis that the education system is facing? The underlying fundamental challenges we are mostly familiar with. And before we talk about those challenges, we should also be clear that without a shadow of doubt, India has made significant progress over the past 70, 80 years in education. And we don't often or not adequately acknowledge that particular matter. Let's take the matter of gender equity. Let's take the matter of enrollments in schools. So if you were to go back, let's say to 1985, 86, more than half our kids were out of school. Gender equity was a distant dream. But today, if you look at the primary levels, for certainly, the enrollment levels are near 100%, the gender equity is near 100%. So we've made tremendous progress over the past 70 years, but there's absolutely no question at all, absolutely no question that we are way off from what we've been wanting for ourselves. And one can characterize how we have fallen so short of what we wanted. But the fact is that learning outcomes at a very basic level, reading, writing, numeracy, is inadequate. Much more importantly, I would think it's not just that matter. Our curricular ideas and curricular goals are, I think, very worthy, very, very worthy. Some of our policy initiatives are very worthy. But if our curricular goals and curricular ideas are committing to education which is developing our children and our young holistically, right? Holistically, when I say holistically, cognitive, emotional, ethical, physical, emotional development, we are way short from that when we are way short from our basic goals, literacy and numeracy. So, we have a big gap between what we want our education to do as outcomes, and not merely the narrow outcomes of numeracy and literacy. We also have big gaps on the matter of equity. While I talked about gender parity at the primary level, that's not true at all if you start breaking the country in different slices and see what kind of equity exists. The most glaring of that, of course, is the inequity between those who are relatively better off and those who are not so. So we have a staggering array of challenges. Our teacher education system, what prepares teachers, and the reason I point that out amongst many challenges is that eventually our education system is only as good as the teachers, right? And our teachers are just as good as the people that we have in this country, and they're not bad people. Generally, they're good people. So the question really is that if India has good people, but we have a fair amount of inadequacy in the teacher system, why is that so? And that's simply so because the system that you know as the B.Ed, D.Ed system is totally broken. It's by far the most corrupt, the most ineffective thing in this country. I keep saying that we've talked about the coal scam and the 3G scam and all kinds of stuff, but the biggest scam is the teacher education scam that goes on. Let me just sort of cap this up by saying we made tremendous progress in education over the past 70 years, but there's extraordinary challenges that face us, absolutely extraordinary challenges that face us on educational outcomes, on the most important matters of equity, and there were very many underlying dimensions to it, such as teacher education that I talked about. Right? The national education policy, which is approved by the Union Cabinet in July last year, I think it's a comprehensive roadmap to improving India's education, starting with pre-primary up through university and beyond for lifelong learning. That national education policy, which was approved in July 2020, unfortunately, and unfortunately in very many ways, came precisely at the time when we are struggling with the pandemic. Right? So its implementation has not been at the same pace as I'm sure any one of us, including the government, would have desired. But nevertheless, that policy looks out over the next 20 odd years and really addresses frontally, without hesitating at all, the core issues that plague Indian education. So that's sort of as quick, as high level a summary of this complex matter that one can talk about. The second part. So if you recollect, I said there are fundamental issues that are there with our education. And then there is something immediate. And given the time that we are having this discussion in, I want to give a lot of emphasis to the immediate crisis that is facing us. Our schools have been shut for 17 months. Most of the kids, 250 million children go to schools. I'm not talking about the privileged 20, 30 million children. Let's take the 220 million children, the most of this country. These children have had no education for the past 17 months. So when you have not had education for 17 months, one is the obvious fact that what you should have learned in those 17 months, you have not learned. So a class 6 child today was in class 5 last year, which she didn't go to, was actually in class 4 when school shut down in March 2020. So she's not been to class 5, she was in class 4 when the school shut down. So she's not learned anything for 17 months. Even more importantly, if you don't go to school for 17 months, you forget much of what you knew earlier. So she's forgotten what she knew in March 2020. This is an extraordinary, astounding crisis that's facing India. So when and as the schools open up over the next month and a half, you are going to enter classrooms where children have not been to school for 17 months and have forgotten much of what they knew in March 2020. We don't exactly know how to deal with this. Yeah. But the fact is, this has to be our greatest priority, right? Yeah. And there are very many ways that we can talk about later, but yeah. Raj, I think with that I'll end.
Yeah. Thank you, Anurag. I mean, that's indeed some staggering statistics, both presenting the opportunity and what we faced with, but equally the challenge and the crisis of the magnitude that you paid. So I think that's a perfect backdrop. Thank you for setting the context. Ramanan, if I might ask you, in your work at Atal Innovation Lab, obviously the focus has been largely on the practical skills-based development aspect that maybe works adjunct with the work that Anurag has been doing. What's your perspective on some of the primary challenges and opportunity?
Thank you, Raj. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to share the platform with Anurag. I greatly esteem his position as well as the work that he's doing. And before I proceed, I do hope that all of you who have logged on are hale and hearty in spite of this very difficult COVID-19 circumstances, and that all of you are following the safeguards advocated by the local government, by the authorities, or by your local institutions. Indeed, I believe, Raj, and I'm sure every one of us would agree, that every one of us who has achieved something in life have been coached by various people during the entire period of our life. Starting with your parents, going to your teachers in the school, going to friends who meant well and were well-wishers, professors, friends, colleagues, people at the office, and so on and so forth. We all tremendously benefit from coaching, whether it is formal or informal. And secondly, we also forget that we in turn should also coach other people based upon our unique learnings, our unique experiences, and our unique perspectives. And I therefore commend you for initiating this Coaching for Growth convention or conference, which allows us to deliberate on this very, very important topic. I think Anurag brought out very beautifully both the opportunity and the challenges. But let me share a little bit of a perspective from the Atal Innovation Mission. Why the mission was set up, what is it all about, and how coaching and mentoring becomes such an important part in whatever we are trying to achieve. Atal Innovation Mission is not just a mission to get practical skills for the people. That is not the objective, or that's not the aim, Raj. The aim is we have 1.3 billion people in our country. We have 65% of our people under 35 years old. We have more than 50% of our people under 25 years old. We have what they call as a demographic dividend, which is the envy of many a country. because we are going to have a young population, and we are going to continue to have this young population for the next several years. We're already one of the fastest growing economies in the world, with growing at 6 to 8%. And we have more than 250 million people in the middle class rising economy. We are going to be adding another 250 million people or more to this economy. And that means tremendous amount of demand for solutions, services that this country needs and the world needs. If you want to achieve something that is sustainable for an entire country of 1.3 billion people, and our challenges are many, as they have said. We have more than 1.4 million schools in our country. We have more than 10,500 engineering and related institutions. We have over 39,000 colleges. We have 1 million engineering graduates coming out every year, and we are going to have 150 million young students or young people joining the workplace over the next 5 to 10 years. Now, if we are not able to leverage this demographic dividend into a powerful transformative force for our country, to be able to achieve not only the dreams of the future generation, but also to be able to position our country into a continuous position of socio-economic progress, it is very important. Education becomes a very important part in this entire scheme. And if you want to give quality education to about these 65% of 1.4 billion people, it is imperative that we see how do we supplement whatever initiatives are happening to create and promote an ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship across the length and breadth of a country. We're not going to have the existing companies being able to satisfy the demands that this country and this population is going to have. So we need thousands and, in fact, millions of entrepreneurs, innovators in our country. And that is why the Atal Innovation Mission was formed, to create and promote that ecosystem of innovation and entrepreneurship spanning the length and breadth of our country. And what are we talking about? We are talking about 715 districts in our country, out of which 115 are still called aspirational districts. We are talking about 8,000 small towns and cities. And we just have 8 tier 1 cities to which most of the people try to migrate and flock in order to search for lives and livelihoods. We are talking about 650,000 villages in our country, which do not experience all the benefits and still have problems like affordable drinking water, clean drinking water, sanitation, waste management, affordable healthcare, affordable housing, and so on. Now, if you want to transform this country, education is an absolute necessity. But quality education is even more important. And that is why the Atal Innovation Mission has taken these initiatives to set up thousands of tinkering labs across the length and breadth of our country. Because, what has brought us here is not going to take us further. We need to create innovators, problem solvers, and job creators of the future, not just job seekers. There will be plenty of job seekers, but you have to have people who can create jobs. So you need to be able to create that environment in our young students. Now, how do we go about doing that? So we do that by setting up these tinkering labs where young students from grade 6 to grade 12 get an opportunity to tinker with and play with technologies that are creating the solutions of tomorrow. And we are living in a world of very advanced technology and advancing technology. Technology has become affordable, accessible, available, and advanced. So you have 3D printing, robotics, IoT, miniaturized electronics, augmented virtual reality, blockchain, artificial intelligence, all upon which the solutions of tomorrow are being built. Now, if you do not imbibe these knowledge of these technologies, not necessarily expertise, but knowledge of these technologies and the usage of these technologies in our educational system, we are not going to progress much. And that is why more than 10,000 tinkering labs have been set up in India across the 715 districts. And 70% of them are in government-aided schools. 70% of them are in girls and co-ed schools to address the gender equality that Anurag talked about. And more than 70% are in tier 2, tier 3 cities. Less than 30% are in the tier 1 cities. Now, what do we try to do with this? We want to create this problem-solving, innovative mindset in the young students so that when they go into universities, they are finding opportunities to create their own entrepreneurial organizations. And that is why hundreds of incubators, now 10,000 tinkering labs have been set up. More than 4.5 million young students are now exposed to all of this. And then you have hundreds of incubators being set up, fostering thousands of startups. If we say that we have a world-class university, and every university, the 10,500 engineering institutions or the 39,000 colleges, they should all aspire to be world-class universities. You need to have world-class incubators to foster world-class startups. That's what India's future should be, not just to trigger the economic progress, but also the social progress. So now if you want to make all this happen, how do we go about when there is a gap, as Anurag said, in the teachers? They are not equipped with the knowledge of the latest technologies or the methodologies or the pedagogies and so on. So for addressing this, we created a huge network of mentors. And this is where I say we have to give back to society what we have got, every one of us has been able to get. So we created, when I requested our organization to see how many voluntary mentors can join the Atal Innovation Mission initiatives, we got a surprising result. More than 10,000 mentors registered themselves. And all of them are professionals working in organizations like Wipro or TCS or Infosys or IBM or Google or Amazon and so on. They are professors from universities and from the academic institutions, from NGO organizations and so on. This is what is giving strength to the movement and the initiative and the game-changing initiatives that we are trying to do in education. That mentoring and that coaching aspect, which people been there, done that, know that, and are able to transmit that knowledge and the experience and their learnings to the teachers, to the students, and to the university students who are wanting startups, who want to start the startups. That becomes a very important opportunity for us. And we are very lucky. I mean, we have a $190 billion IT/ITs industry and very highly qualified people who have been able to grow with this industry. And if we are able to engage them in this coaching as well as coaching for growth, the opportunities are tremendous. And I can say the outcomes have been tremendous too. Out of the 4 million students who are participating today in Atal Tinkering Labs, and that's a movement by its own, you should, all of those who are on this call and who have not visited an Atal Tinkering Lab should go and visit it. Young students from grade 6 to grade 12 are creating solar panel IoT-based irrigation management system. You don't find the solution in many companies like TCS or Wipro or Infosys and so on. But young students at grade 6 to grade 12 are doing it. And how do they do it? Because you empower them with technology, because you empower them with free thinking, without the burden of rote learning and getting marks in the exam, and because you parallelly equip them with coaches and mentors who take this very seriously. And we'll come to the later on, hopefully in the discussion, what really goes into great mentoring and great coaching. Because you have these dedicated, passionate mentors, these initiatives will become successful. And India will be able to reach its full potential in terms of what this demographic dividend offers. So I think the challenges are many, as has been already shared by Anurag, but I think the opportunities are even greater. And this is what we all together and collectively should enable for our country to come forward.
Thanks so much, Ramanan. I mean, that was a very similar but contrasting perspective as well. I want to pick on one thing that I heard from both of you, and thank you for pointing out, that I had misrepresented it. So both of you talked a little bit, not so much about skills, but the development and innovation and growth a little bit. The development focus rather than just the rote skills focus that you're trying to achieve. And that in some way in my mind speaks to the essence of coaching. And I want to kind of connect it back to why we thought of this session in the first place. Coaching as its essence has an element of self-direction, the self-awareness, the learning how to learn almost. And what I heard from both of you is a certain amount of that needing to be built in to enable an individual, at any stage of one's educational career. It could be a lifelong process to build in that mindset. So I wanted to get some quick reactions from Anurag, and you mentioned particularly the role of equipping teachers who have such a critical role, particularly in primary education. But then along the way, teachers could be supplemented by mentors and then so on. What do you think are some of the commonalities that having a coaching mindset could have play in the education, both as a learner as well as an educator?
So Raj, I'm sort of missing a phrase that you used in your question, and I wanted to take that phrase and rephrase it. So
Sure.
the essence of what I was trying to rephrase it to was that if you look at education and our educational goals and our commitment to what we want to do, not what we are able to do, we leave that aside for the time being, right? Because as I mentioned, there are challenges galore, so we leave that. But what is our education wanting to do, including as articulated specifically, explicitly in the national education policy? Let's look at that. And what it is attempting is to develop the fundamental capacities of our students, the fundamental and the basic capacities of our students. Note that I'm not using the word skill. The word skill has a certain kind of connotation, certainly in education, and it's too loosely used, and it essentially has come to sort of get imputed with a certain kind of shallowness, if I may call it, right? So we leave that word skill aside. So the education that we are committing to is about development of the fundamental capacities of human beings. And that's not just at the primary level, but through schooling and through higher education. I'll talk about three things which are directly relevant to what you were mentioning. One, in effect, one of the most important aims of education that the policy and curriculum is committing to is to develop the capacity of learning to learn, which is what you said just now. And the reason for that is fairly simple, which is that if you can develop the capacities or the capacity of learning to learn, then you actually have a person on a certain kind of self-directed trajectory all through her life. And that matter of learning to learn as much is important for the student is even more important for the teacher. Because the job of a teacher, the role of a teacher, the profession of teaching is of a nature which is creative inherently. Every moment of your teaching life, you're dealing with a human beings who are different, and the same human being is different at all times. And therefore, if you have the ability to learn, therefore you become better and better as a teacher. So 1.1, explicit commitment to learning to learn as one of the most important foundational capacities. So that's one. Second is this whole matter of social capacities. And social capacities is about interrelationships, relationships, working with people, being able to, you use the word mentor, and I mean, each field has its own different terminology, so I won't use the word mentor, but let's say work on the matter of teaching learning, right? So this whole matter of social capacities is absolutely critical and central to this, what I have been calling fundamental capacities as goals of education. Third, this whole matter becomes even more important when we think of it in this manner, that we tire ourselves, we just tire ourselves by talking about how fast the world is changing, and how fast the world is changing from a perspective of livelihoods and employment, how fast the world is changing socially, politically, and so on and so forth. And in a world of this kind, which the only thing you can be sure about is it will keep changing very rapidly, and perhaps even more rapidly than the year before, what is it that can help a human being for her overall well-being? Overall well-being meaning partly, of course, being economically independent, to be able to relate to other human beings, to have an ethical commitment. What will help that person, right? What will help that person? Because you cannot think of quote unquote skills which will address the issues of today, either for employment or for the world around her, because that's insufficient. In 5 years' time, 10 years' time, things will be very different. And that's why this intense focus on what I've called the fundamental capacities. In the changing world, in the rapidly changing world of today, and I must also point out that we should not have some kind of an exceptionalism about our times, that our times are changing very rapidly. Times have been changing rapidly all the time, and the world of 1980 was very different from the world of 1945. Very different. Similarly, the world of today is very different, and tomorrow will be different. So the changing nature of human life, this matter of fundamental capacities, which to my mind very akin to what this group calls coaching, which is about learning to learn, which is about setting people on a trajectory where they can take charge of their own development rather than an external force being all the time guiding their development. They can take charge of their own development with an important element for human connection. That becomes even more critical. Right? So I would actually encourage many of you, or most of you, to read the Dr. Kasturi Rangan Committee report, which was a 484-page report. You may just glance through it, but read a few chapters, which really was the basis for the formulation of the national education policy. That, I think, will give you an interesting perspective of how education, in some senses, embeds the ideas of coaching as you think of it as core to what is required today and tomorrow.
Raj, you're on mute.
Yep. No, Anurag, thank you. I point that you just made, and I know you've been on record as saying the ultimate aim of education is to, develop better human beings, and that everything else follows. I think that we had a conversation about that, and in many ways it parallels again. Taking an analogy from coaching, you're not really coaching. You may start with coaching the what, but really you're coaching the why, and as a bigger construct, coaching the who, right? And thank you for sharing that perspective. I'm going to toggle back to Ramanan and Ramanan in talking about you mentioned all the amazing technology aspects that you're bringing to bear as part of Atul Innovation Mention, but you also mentioned the mentoring, and I wanted to get two quick perspectives from you. How is technology? One is obviously you're imparting technology skills, but how do you see leveraging technology to impact the ability to deliver education? And I know there are positives and negatives. And the second piece that you mentioned is very interesting because I think it talks to something that Anurag mentioned, the challenge of the teacher system, but you touched on the mentoring aspect, and I was wondering whether you had a perspective, and whether Anurag can react, whether that might be tapping into almost an non-traditional source, but of highly skilled people who may be able to step in and fill the gap of quality teaching in the role that you mentioned. So maybe two questions, sorry, a little bit, but related.
Yeah, thanks, Raj. And, picking on what, or continuing on what Anurag said, I think the fundamental thing that we all are trying to achieve is, as he said, how can we unlock the full potential of a human being? That's what education should do. And education should enable this unlocking of the full potential, reaching their full potential, and be able to blossom as a human being and as a great contributor to society. Now, in that process, as he also said, we have to learn. And today we are in a great position to learn, not just because of that philosophy becoming more and more prevalent, but also because of the tools and technologies that are available to us to enable us to learn. And in fact, I would just add one more thing. We need to learn to unlearn, and that's what most of our teachers in our schools have to become more familiar with. They are used to a standard way of teaching. They're also used to standard expectations from a student's behavior. They want the student to just listen to them, not question them, not ask any particular question that is troubling to them. In fact, they punish them for all these purposes, and they are not leveraging what is happening out in the world in terms of tools, technologies that is enabling new information to be added. And that, I think, is very important, learning to learn and learning to unlearn existing models. This whole emphasis on rote learning, that is still so very prevalent. Even where we have used Adult Tinkering Labs, we purposely launched this without associating them with curriculum or grades or credits in the class, because this has become a great disincentive for many students. If they are not among the top 5 rankers or the 10 rankers in the class, they feel disillusioned, they feel a sense of inferiority and a sense of complex. And what we found in these Adult Tinkering Labs is that some of the best innovations came from students not who are academically proficient and who are scoring the highest marks in the class, but by students who are the backbenchers and who have suddenly found a mechanism of being able to unleash their creative potential and demonstrate it through the skills that they have been able to leverage as well as learn using technology. Now, this is where many teachers have come back to us and said, hey, we thought this student, and many parents have come back to us and they have said, we thought our student was not doing well and this student is not doing well. But by the way, he is the best innovator, and we want him, whenever you are putting a tinkering challenge and a tinkering marathon, we want them to be able to do this, innovation, because most of the academically superior students or getting good marks, they don't necessarily relate to innovation, entrepreneurship, problem solving, and so on. Now, I think this is where the teachers are also getting changed, because through the mentors who get associated with this. And mentoring is what? Mentoring and coaching is a friend whom you are introducing in the midst. You're not a teacher, is not a parent. Both of them have different expectations out of the students. But the mentor is a person or the coach should be a person who is able to unlock the full potential of the child. And that requires him or her to be a great motivator. The person needs to be able to empathize with the students. They need to enthuse the students, saying that, hey, they are not the people, as the great saying goes, don't give me fish, but teach me how to fish. Tools and technologies of today are enabling the people to learn how to fish, how to solve problems, how to create solutions for problems they see in and around the community. That's how you have a robotic-based waste management system being developed by a group of students in Sikkim, or a surveillance management system, or an sensor-based cap for disabled people or blind people to be able to cross the road. I mean, that's the sort of innovations that is happening by the students. And here the mentors come, people from Intel or from IBM or for TCS or wherever, and they come and help the students to understand that you can be the problem solver, you can be the creator of a solution. The third thing is, from the mentor point of view, this 10,000 mentors network, we have told them very clearly, you are not the teacher. You are not going to be there and administering some rules to the student that this is thou shalt do this and thou shalt not do that. That's the worst way of teaching anybody. Instead, teach them how to solve the problem. Okay, and let them solve the problem. You are not the solver of the problem. Don't be eager to show your prowess in being able to solve the problem, but make sure that the student can do that, and that is nurturing that capability within the student. And then second thing is, you need a team-based approach. You are a friend and you are a team player. Now, a teacher often finds it very difficult to be that sort of player. They need to bring some discipline. The parent is expecting some student to their child to listen to them and obey them. But the mentor or the coach can become a real team player, and he becomes a part of the team whom he is mentoring. And then you are opening up the opportunity landscape for the student. You are no longer looking at you have to do good in marks. For example, this entire coaching, Neeraj Chopra today is winning the Olympics. It's somebody has to notice this potential in this child and see that this person can become an Olympic winner, can be a great singer, can be a dancer, and so on. And that is where the coach, the right type of coach, will unlock that potential and bring other coaches into the system. They'll say, oh, I'm not equipped to coach this particular boy who has some extraordinary capabilities, so let me bring another coach into the system. And that's what this network of mentors that we do. We encourage them that if you find that you are not able to coach this particular boy or girl in the area of their interest, bring the other coaches. And this huge network now you have, so leverage that network. And finally, all of this is, how do you inspire the child, inspire the student in a very holistic manner, so that they become very proud about themselves. And all of us, Raj, are born innovators. Nobody taught us how to stand when we were born. Nobody taught us how to talk when we were born. We looked at the world around us. We stood up, fell down, stood up again, fell down. And every time we innovated, and we started running, and we started winning Olympics, and we started talking, and we started singing. So, innovation is inherent, and talent is inherent in every individual. How do you unlock that? And how do you bring that out? That's the purpose of coaching. That's the purpose of mentoring. And I hope all the people, all of us get engaged in that, because that's going to create a better world.
Thanks, Ramanan. I think that perfectly brought out a contrasting perspective of how all these learning interventions coexist, mentoring, coaching. But I thought you summed it up beautifully, saying that unlocking the potential is really common to looking to what you're doing as well as coaching. I know that we are coming toward the end of the session. I wanted to leave a little time for a couple of audience questions, but if I may, Anurag, pose one more question to you. I know that you've been doing work across the primary education system, the formal education system, so to speak, in both primary all the way through to postgrad. But how do you see the role of non-formal education? You talked about constant lifelong learning, but is there an opportunity to step in and fill some of the gap that's there that you painted for us in the current educational construct, for leveraging non-traditional perhaps educators and education sources to address some of the challenges that you painted?
Raj, I think there is no other way to start my response but to say that we have to get the fundamentals in place. Whatever you refer to, can it be like the icing on the cake? Yes, it could be. But you got to have a cake before you have the icing, right? So, we should not, in forums of this nature, anywhere else, we should not delude ourselves that unless we invest systematically, and when I say invest, I don't mean only money, it's human energy focus. Unless we invest systematically into the fundamental matters of education, we are not going to get there. And that's not just about primary and secondary education, it's the higher education system that we have. So I think we should be very clear about that, very, very clear about that. And if we do not that, something of this nature hurts the disadvantaged far more. I talked about how the pandemic has hurt the 210, 220 million odd children in a staggering way, which the upper middle class is not seeing really, right? So now, having said that, could there be a possibility of the kind that you talked about? Absolutely, no question about it, right? No question about it. And it sort of, the possibilities on that range a fair bit, right? So one kind of a thing is, and this is going to be a very important thing over the next, I think, 20 odd years. The policy, the national education policy, is attempting to integrate what is called vocational education with what is called mainstream education. So if you were to imagine, it's like saying that, all children, and that's not streaming, meaning it's not two separate streams of vocational education and mainstream education. All children will go through some kind of vocational education, and that will begin in some way in grade 6. In fact, vocational education will get integrated in the higher education system also. Now, how can you make that happen? You can make that happen. I'll use an illustration, right? It becomes clearer. It can happen if you say, look, I have a small town here. In that small town, in the schools, when we are integrating vocational education, there are all kinds of vocational education streams possible. I'm going to integrate, let's say, glass work that happens in that area. And how will you be able to integrate glasswork in that area? If only motivated, socially intentioned people start contributing into the schools, because the schools teachers are not going to do glasswork. They don't know how to do that. So just imagine the small town, if and all small towns in this country and villages in this country, and if the country wants to then integrate vocational education into the mainstream, involving the kind of efforts, Raj, that you alluded to, is going to become a very important thing. Right? So I'm using that as an illustration, not as the most definitive or the most important of an example. So examples are many, so long as we remember that there is no substitute to the fundamental matters of school education. For instance, what I started off with, we have to fix our B.Ed system. we have to have good teacher education. Unless you have basically good teacher preparation, and it's good people go into teacher education. It's the question of how we prepare them. So unless we fix those kind of things, the other things which are the icing on the cake would not be, they would not be tasty.
Point taken, Anurag. I think you make that point very clear, and completely agree. Start with the basics, but look for opportunities in parallel that one can use. And I see from the work, just to share with both of you, I see from the work of many of the coaching chapters, a lot of engagement with potentially educators, initiatives like Teach for India for colleges, where those educators, and there was a lovely session yesterday where they talked about students and teachers as learner educators and educator learners, right? So there is, just as in with the coaching and coachee relationships, there's a learning and education going on at every moment of engagement, Anurag, that you talked about. So couldn't agree more. Ramanan, just any comments from you? I touched on it, but from your perspective, I'd love to connect back to what Anurag said, right? Tightly integrating our mainstream education with the vocational education. In many ways, that's what Atal has been doing in some ways. So any comments on that, and then we'll take maybe a couple of audience questions.
Yeah, no, first of all, the NEP 2020, as Anurag himself referred to in his first interaction today, that's a wonderful policy, a very comprehensive set of policies that have come. And I think it is very important for us to see how to implement it, because very often, just the intent is not good enough. We need to see how to implement these intents and make sure that they are successful. And everywhere else in the world, especially in the advanced economies, this tight integration between vocational skills and academic universities and so on is there. I mean, Germany and US are great examples where people feel incentivized to follow their passion, whether it is in an academic area, whether it is engineering, or whether it is theoretical sciences, or whether it is practical implementations or skill development and so on. And they have an opportunity to move from one area to another with ease. That's what we need to facilitate in India. And hopefully that is, already the NEP 2020 has clearly made that as an important objective to be realized. And I'm sure that this opinion and this thinking will gain ground across the country. I also think, Raj, I just want to add that this whole coaching and mentoring, why I consider this very important, is it addresses many gaps that we have in our existing systems. And it's going to be very difficult for policy to be able to fill those gaps, or policy-based implementations to fill the gaps. And there is an opportunity for every one of us who are in the call and beyond to play an active role, because we want to see society progressing. So what is it that we can bring and what we can do in this context? And I think there's a lot that can be done by corporates, by NGO organizations like Azim Premji Foundation are already doing a remarkable job in that. But we need more such corporates to get engaged in this, because at the end of the day, they are the recipients of a better education system. And if there are gaps in the education system, everyone has to play an important role in being able to fill that gap. And also, I believe, I don't see still in India this mentorship concept and the coaching concept extending into corporate industry. Once you're going into an industry, people I don't see mentors being associated with the young trainees who are coming in and who are able to make them rise to their full potential. So very often a person remains where they are for years and years together, and they never get a chance to be able to exercise their full capabilities, or they never get a chance to get empowered further, to get educated further. And I think that's an important gap also to be filled, because your education career doesn't end with the school education and getting into a job. I mean, that's where your real education also starts. So how do we ensure that mentoring and that coaching mentality, and there's a paradigm shift in corporate organizations and industry to incorporate that and integrate that into their working style? That is also very important. So I just thought it is worth mentioning. And finally, I believe India especially needs great incentivization. How do we incentivize? People may say money is the only way you can incentivize. No, I think you can incentivize people, and Atal Innovation Mission actually showed to us. We recognize teachers of change, mentors of change. We recognize them on multiple platforms, and people are so proud to be recognized as a teacher of change in a particular district, or in a particular village, or in a particular set of schools. And once you give that sort of recognition, they proudly display that when they declare that we are a mentor of change and we are a certified mentor of change or whatever. That incentivization is also as important. Of course, money is important. You cannot great teachers if you don't incentivize the teachers, whether in universities or in schools. But at the same time, I think there are many other forms of recognition that we should all embark upon, and that will also be very useful to incentivize great coaching and great change in the country.
Thanks, Ramanan. And again, you stated this beautifully in terms of moving the. Sorry, a little bit of lag. Apologies for that. But you stated that I wanted to take the essence of what you said, moving away from the problem focus to the solution focus. And that's, again, an essential part of the coaching mindset. So thank you for illustrating that so beautifully. I'll take one question from the audience. A few have come, Anurag, and leave it to you in the same vein. I think Bhavani has a question for you that, you mentioned in the beginning of your talk about, the staggering impact of the last year. But I think there's a question from Bhavani in the audience. What are a couple of things that we should or can be doing to address it? Staying with the solution focus on the.
You said Bhavani, right? So Raj and Bhavani, I think the response that India needs to have, not my response to this question. The response that India needs to have is a fairly simple response, which is that if children have not learned for 17 months and they have forgotten much of what they knew in March 2020, when they return to the classroom, you'll have to start from where the child is. So when the child is supposedly coming into class 6, actually the child is not at class 6. He's perhaps in class 4 and class 3 on certain kinds of things. There is no substitute but to start from where the child is. So essentially what you're saying is, and I'm using this as an illustration, please let us not make the cruel, astounding mistake of starting our syllabus from class 6, because the child does not know anything about class 5 and has forgotten much about class 4. So start from where the child is. What does this mean? It means we'll have to give teachers time to recover lost years and lost learning. You cannot enter the classroom, teacher cannot enter the classroom and restart everything as though the past 17 months did not happen. We, and I'm talking about the country, even more than the government, the society, which is so fixated, quote unquote, on lost year or lost months. We've got to change our mindset. Unless we give teachers time to recover lost learning, you will have the most extraordinary, deleterious impact on the future of our children and of the country. So give them time. Second, give teachers support in terms of teaching learning material. That's just a fancy way of saying workbooks and other stuff with which they can teach children who are at different levels of learning, right? So it is how to address is not unknown, not complicated. It is for us as a country, as a society, to have just a simple clarity that this is what needs to be done. Give teachers time to recover lost learning and give them help. Of course, there are other things that we need to construct around that. We need to perhaps reconfigure the curriculum and syllabus that we have to make it content lighter so that it can be covered in slightly less time. But let me not go into that, let's call it technical detail.
Thanks, Anurag. Well, with that, plenty of food for thought and lots of brilliant insights and leaving us with a lot to think about from a coaching perspective. The learning how to learn aspect is something that I completely took away. The 360-degree development of a complete human, bridging the gap using the mentoring approach, teach a man to fish that you talked about so brilliantly, Ramanan. But overall, I think lots of takeaways for us to think about. Thank you for your time and for bearing with some of the slight technology challenges. Krishnan, I'll hand back to you for.
Thank you, Raj. Raj, quick one. In this whole 1 hour, for me, as feelings, honesty was visible, vulnerability was visible. The challenging themselves was extremely visible. Amazing session that we've had in the past 1 hour. Thank you, Anurag. Thank you, Ramanan, for being what you are and sharing things from your heart. And Raj, very well curated, and thank you so much for doing what you're good at. So why I will be failing in my duty if I do not thank the sponsors and partners without whom this conclave wouldn't have happened.